More couch musings, as it goes. A lot of good insights from the couch, but one of the challenges is trying to chart your course from said couch, because the knowing comes from the doing, primarily. Although oftentimes I try and cheat that system by, if I can just be crafty enough, I can avoid physical travel. And sometimes, of course, logistically and monetarily, that's wise, right? To be like, well, I can't necessarily hop around everywhere and physically check out these places or ways of living. But yeah, I just, as I approach the new year here, I'm kind of I feel like an important crossroads, especially after 2 years of kind of stuck in a rut, not really thriving. And I'm reminded of, I made this post a while ago about, um, you know, Buddhism didn't arise from indigenous communities and like natural living communities for a reason, you know? Even though I know like they borrowed from Taoism and maybe some other things that were perhaps proto civilization, but Buddhism and the monastic traditions that followed, they were in a direct pushback to all the craziness of Babylon and nation states and the money system and the cruelty and the wrong livelihoods and all this stuff. It was a direct pushback. And I think for a while there, over the last few years since I had that kind of epiphany, because it seemed kind of alien to me, and it still does in some ways. But that's kind of what you need when the alternative is just like this gross society that we are stuck in by and large. And I guess I always thought the third option, and it's still sort of viable, is like, intentional communities which try to kind of get back to, in some respects, indigenous ways of living, permaculture. You can live with your family and live closer to Earth's natural systems, and that's like the best we can do given the constraints, because we can't go back. I really can't. And I think, like I've always had this rewilding interest and focus that's waxed and waned, and but like I just don't know how, if you're really gonna live that fully as like a guiding principle, I don't really know how you do it. And it seems to me almost like you have to cosplay as a rewilder in the modern world, unless you're like, maybe if you're on an intentional community teaching permaculture principles, or you're literally living in the woods half the year or something, off grid, hunting and fishing and surviving off the land, close to how our ancestors did, not necessarily even solo, in community or with a few other people, or your partner or something, you know, uh, because there's going to be such a variation of what even this rewilding concept is for people. It's like you'll have people that work a 9 to 5 and they wear barefoot shoes and they probably think they're rewilding, which is probably true. And maybe they do some other things, but it's like, it's sort of it strikes me as a bit of a mockery that like we are rewilding is sort of like this little, we get a little bit of the past of the indigenous ancestral life ways as a treat, as the kids say, for most of us. And I struggle with how, like I said, how do you live it? Because even one of my mentor, Suelo, kind of lived it in a way when he was squatting in the Moab canyons, but it's such an illegal lifestyle for a lot of it if you're going to do that, or it's an outlaw stance. And it's in such direct opposition to like everything, which is helpful because we don't necessarily want to embrace all this gross mainstream culture. But I just go back and forth on this whole rewilding versus mendicant traditions and everything, and my own free agent expression of this stuff. And obviously, finding like-minded people and rallying around this is the key for whatever you're going to do going forward, as I tell myself this. But through my throat. But the problem that I find, like, you get caught up in your ideals, and then where does that lead you? I think it can kind of lead you to a dead end. Because something about following, like, I think Thich Nhat Hanh said something, or someone in the tradition said something like, you can either be right or you can be kind. So, like, being right in the sense of rewilding is like, what's the most natural way to live, or what's the most appropriate, harmonizing with natural systems, whatever way to live. That's sort of one way you can frame how you want to show up. But it also is maddening because everywhere you go, unless you really unplug completely and you are some like amazing survivalist off-gridder person, I don't really know how you can't feel like you're just you're cosplaying rewilding or something in a fashion, because we are just so tied into everything, and so it's not like we don't want to abandon that concept, because that's important, because it keeps us sane, and it's important for just rejecting the traditional norms that got us into this place, trying to get back to our ancient wisdom. But like I said, yeah, you can maybe be a professor and teach about it, like like all these different routes, but it's real kind of hodgepodge. And I don't know. And I think a lot of people are caught up in that trap of idealism versus practicality. And and part of the reason why I bring this up too is that I've been thinking about going back to Deer Park, when I thought I kind of crossed it off my list. Even though if you look at my 30-minute video where I mentioned Deer Park a bunch when I talk about the mendicancy, and it's like, oh yeah, there's definitely something there tugging at me. And I'm reminded too, I was talking to my dad the other day, and he was saying, he used to bounce around a lot with jobs, as is common, especially with somebody who's like neurodivergent, ADHD like he is. But that can be really detrimental in this society, to bounce around, because you don't have the stability or pensions, or what can you build on, really, a lot of times. But he always had the National Guard. And then in his later years, which is funny because I'm like, when he decided to do that, I'm getting close to that age now. I think he went full-time National Guard in his mid to late 40s, which I'm approaching rapidly. Every year is flying by as I approach 42 next September, in 9 months. And so I keep getting this sense where I think it's like me trying to live like Suelo and other people of that ilk is a noble intention, but it can also be a bit foolhardy, given the context of my background and my resources and my community or lack thereof. um, and like in Portland, it functioned okay, and at points I was thriving. But there's always this unsustainability because my free agent mendicancy is like dependent on being hosted, and usually like some low cheap rent shack situation, which isn't always available. And then like, who are you with? And I've talked about this off and on over the years. It's like, it's kind of a janky situation. It's kind of a tricky situation. And I don't think I've given that enough credit, because part of that is the ego, the sense of self wants to kind of be like, hey, I'm making smart moves. I'm doing a wise thing. This is a noble. I'm living like Christ, Jesus in the 2020s, or even though that's only just like a sliver of what that guy pulled off and the Buddha pulled off and even Peace Pilgrim pulled off. Because I often ask myself, I was like, what's not working and why am I struggling? And even in Portland, I had struggles with it, even in this like nice atmosphere of same pageness, there was something that wasn't always clicking, and there's a lot to unpack. It's like, was I too extreme by not using enough money? Was I too extreme by not cultivating more skills and offerings that could bring in joyful money too? Definitely. I can do the hippie jobs, but that kind of gets tiresome after a while. And I'm more of a trajectory of being like a teacherly role, especially as I get older. It's like, you're not going to dog sitting into your 50s as a rambling man, whatever, isn't so fun, I think, or fulfilling, because anybody can do that, and it's okay here and there, but not as a defining thing. But so yeah, like I said, my dad, he decided to be like, it's time to get real or something. And he had this National Guard thing, which it's obviously not right livelihood, which is often why I know Brother Typhap Young at Deer Park, he's like, monastics are like the military. It's very similar. You join a thing, you come in, you're molded, you're all on the same page, there's a hierarchy, there's order, there's rules. It provides the lane. And he's exactly right. It's just like a wholesome military. And I think even I've heard of some monastics that were former military, and they take a shine to it because of that. And see, I've been this part of my free agent mendicancy, which has actually probably hurt me in a way, is because I've had too much choice, too much autonomy, where I can pretty much plan my days and weeks without much, like a lot of autonomy. And that has led to a lot of choice anxiety, and where I just don't really know what all to do, what's my guidance system, because of it's like you could live in many different places, you could plug in many different projects, if you're just this kind of person that can just be plopped in wherever. And that can be nice, especially in Portland, where I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just exploring for years, trying to figure this out. And like I said, it worked out okay because I'm still here. I'm still relatively healthy. But it's also a little disheartening because I don't have as much stability to show for it. Because it's like, if I was at a monastery in Portland for 7 years, which it was kind of like a monastery, it was like my community. But then you leave it, and then all that goes away physically. So it's like I left the order after 7 years, which generally speaking isn't a great idea. Especially if you're living like me. If you leave a monastic order, whatever, a cocoon, a womb, then you better You better have something lined up. And of course, what I thought in my head was lined up was a deer park, which is still an option.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because I wasn't going to just like make a new home in Corvallis. And then, intentional communities, many, many myriads of flavors of that. Spiritual communities, intentional communities. And that's still an option. But that also presents itself as kind of like the one thing I was thinking about too more, and I think this is true, is like I think me equating like Deer Park and that in those iterations, the monastic tradition and in those places with the garden is actually probably more like apples to oranges, really. And part of that is I haven't been to the garden. And I actually haven't been to too many intentional communities on the ground. I haven't been to Twin Oaks. I haven't been to, all these kinds of places. I've been to Alpha Farm. And when I think of the garden, I've seen videos and heard feedback from the garden. I get a little of that Alpha Farm Rainbow Family twinge, or like, that sort of thing. But I'm concerned, and like I've heard sketchy stuff about the garden from a few people, and it seems kind of a flotsam and a jetsam kind of a rest stop more than like a strong rooted community. Because what the hell is a community if half the people are there half the time, and especially even in the winter? It's like everybody leaves, and then you just have this mothball skeleton crew there for a few months in pretty cold northern Tennessee winter. So it's sort of like for me. And the other problem is too is it's sort of like I'm not necessarily a traveler. I haven't. It's like, what have you done? I'm not a traveler. I'd have to like enter into that world and be outdoor cat, as I've called it, which I still haven't ruled out. But like, I'm not a spring chicken either. I'm not 25. So it's sort of like I'm up against the wall a little bit in terms of like my age and having to honor that, even though I'm still like a young guy in many respects. Like you look at me even and I look like I'm early 30s. And and I think in a lot of ways because of my mendicancy too, I've actually shaved off years, or not shaved off, but added years to my life because I wasn't like working some really hard stressful job or something for the last 10 years. So I've had this easefulness and this spaciousness where I've been able to rest and do joyful things and focus on self-care. That's helped me stay youthful. Because that's the funny thing about the Babylon and the mainstream cultures. Because the mainstream culture says, well, if you're in your early 40s, like these are the things you need to be paying attention to, or like be concerned about, or and it's like I don't know if that applies to me because I haven't been ground down from family and work obligations. It's like the Peter Pan effect. Still pretty youthful. And even going back to my dad too, like if you see my dad and he's like turning 73 in February, but you just from like how energetic he is a lot of the time, and maybe that's fueled by caffeine and other things, but he does still have a youthful exuberance that you'd think maybe he's in his late 50s or something, instead of almost mid 70s. So I think I share that genetically. Um, but my phone's about to die, so it'll be a good time to wrap up. But yeah, so it's just, going back to this. It's almost like, rewilding and indigenous cultures and things, and like that idealized image is very much an ideal. But then it's like, where and the same thing with the intentional communities in the garden and even these, it's like they're starting this network, and it's kind of fledgling rainbow family, free land for free people kind of thing. Because most places that have little communities or little fledgling communities, it can be a real roller coaster, right? It's like, who's hosting? Are they wholesome? Are there drug issues? Is it chaos? One or two people can totally destroy a community because if they haven't taken care of their own business. And so it's like you're just gonna, if it's in this traveler culture, as I understand it, like you're gonna kind of bounce from communities to communities, all these little way stations, gatherings, work opportunities, living in your van. That's the other thing. I don't have a van. I don't want to get a van. And it seems like that's such a prereq is to have a vehicle if you're really going to do that well. I don't want to get sucked into that world. And then, of course, you can hitchhike and do all that. But that's also tiring. And I don't, that's one reason why I haven't, because it's like I don't want to, especially in the States. It's like if I was in Europe or somewhere else, maybe I would reconsider that. But it's like I don't want to go through the hellscape that is America. Sorry. It's like those memes that go around. It's like go play outside, son, and then they show like a strip mall type setup, which is everywhere, every urban area. It's like, yeah, I don't really feel great about going out there. Some reason why I haven't gone into town as much too, because it's the same crap. It's like the traffic, the noise, the concrete, all that energy around you is not great. It's not great to be around. The hustle and the bustle and the endless shopping and all the baloney. It's like great. Urban culture, really a shining light. And that's what it was nice thing about Portland, even because they had more of a local business vibe and a lot more community hubs and things. And Corrales has a little bit of that, but nothing really on the same level. Um, and I mean, a lot of places are way worse. Suburban, just like hellholes of no culture and no life. But yeah, so it's like, so you either become a through hiker, trail bum, and you try to avoid Babylon as much as you can, or you live off grid, or you live in intentional communities, or you have monastery routes, which is another way to buffer some of the worst of modern culture, the decrepit, poisonous modern culture. And but yeah, and I was chatting with my dad on Christmas. We took a walk, and the poor guy's been hearing me rant about this stuff for the last better part of 3 years. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm gonna spare him because he gets every time I think I bring this up, he gets maybe 2% more of what I'm laying down, which is interesting to watch him actually understand it a little bit every time. But still, it's just a different world. So that's part of it. My malaise is I've just been so isolated, is I don't have a bunch of people going, yeah, you're totally right. What are we gonna do about it? Because I know I'm right, but being right, where does that get you necessarily? And that brings you back to the thing about, it's like even that meme about the dog where it's like, no need to be best, only kind. And that's like, it brings you back to the Plum Village tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh. It's like these guys, like part of my bugaboo, like the money stuff and the paywall and kind of, they're a little more traditional in some ways, I guess. But it's actually like established and it's secure. And like having resources come at you isn't like a bad thing. For me especially, as long as it's accessible to a large degree and through scholarships or online work or something, like it really, as long as there's some little loophole, then like it's maybe not such a big deal to actually have resources. Because this is part of the ego where it's like, I existed in Portland on $2,000 a year. Okay, cool. Where are you now? Like, like I've been able to be hardy and nimble with that because I know I can exist on very little. But like, that's like a cool simplicity flex. But you know, that's why part of my error in my ways, I think, of thinking about this. And especially even I think about, like some of my buddies, and even like, Suelo again. I've had little fleeting hints of like, was this guy, I love the man dearly, and he's right, like I said, he's right. He's absolutely 100% right. But how does that show up? How does that show up in the practical world? And it can be funky. And of course, Suelo's taking care of his mom right now and using money through her to help that process. So it's like even my mentor has to succumb to reality sometimes in the natural or just the system. You can't be in complete opposition to it. It'll just chew you up. And that's one reason why I went down to Deer Park in the first place, because I was like, I think I'm done. I think I'm ready to throw in the towel. But like admitting defeat on a path isn't always a bad thing. It's like, it's just, it is what it is. It's like, hey, I tried this thing, And the thing is, even with like Suelo and his inspiration, some other people in Portland's direct inspiration, a lot of it is like a solo thing, because it's not replicable. And I remember even when I would talk to a lot of people about it over the years, I would often know that as I'm telling them, and I'd be like, hardly anybody can live like me, but you can live closer to me. That's probably a good aim. Like live more simply, cool, and that would inspire people. And so I've always felt good about that. But once again, it's like I knew I was in this weird little bubble that's not really sustainable, you know? And there's always like that insecurity of like, okay, when when you lose your miraculous cheap housing here in this cool wholesome community, what are you gonna do? So that was always there. And that's what it's gonna be like if I continue to be like this kind of flotsam jetsam free agent mendicancy guy. And it doesn't feel great. And that's one thing, like I said, going back to Deer Park, where it was like, the monastic retirement plan is kind of the joke. It's like, here's the off ramp. And I made a post a couple months ago where I was like, I think I missed my off ramp years back. And I sort of did, in terms of like maybe a smoother entry, especially with my age. But Deer Park is still the age cap is 50, which is interesting because that's pretty generous. And even when I was there for, okay, we're going next. And even when I was there for, when I was there for the rains, and we were talking about all the things. What am I talking about? When I was there at Rains, sorry, I lost my train of that. Let's just cap it. It's probably enough for now. But yeah, just the musings, finding place at the new year here, finding clarity, trying to find purpose in place fully again, fully integrated, because I've been kind of on the sidelines for the last few years, which is too long for me to sustain. And like I said, part of that is, I think, is just because I've been trying to live like my buddy Suelo, who, like I said, I guess this brings you back to what I was thinking. Like, so like it is kind of a solo-ish adventure primarily, even though he and I have both had lots of people joining us at various points indirectly and living together and being hosted and traveling and sharing things. But it kind of comes and goes, comes and goes. And there's a lot of instability with that. And in some ways, and that's once again the ego thing, because you're trying to shield yourself. It's like, I'm making smart moves. This is the way to be. This is the way to be. This is my, life's calling. And even when I was at Deer Park, this is what brings me back to what I was thinking. I was like, I don't want to join. It's like this genie in the bottle thing that I've talked about. I don't want to join this institution because it sort of swallows up everything I've done. At least that's what I was thinking, right? It's like, I don't know, is that true? Or will it augment actually what I've done, and then it'll be transformed in the Sangha? As opposed to like, because there's this thing of like the cult of personality, or like, even when I first started this crazy experiment, it was like, I'm going to be crowdfunded or something as like an Instagram, whatever, like a personality, right? It's like, this guy is going to get a Wikipedia page. And I used to talk about this all the time. Like, I'm going to get my Wikipedia page just like Suelo or whatever. And because I've done this extreme thing, and there's going to come notoriety from it and all this kind of celebrity, thing. And part of that is, it's you're wrapped up in your own little ego world. And even with Suelo, it's like he set out this stuff to inspire people, but he didn't necessarily want to be a mentor directly. Or maybe at certain points he did. Maybe when we were doing the moneyless tribe, and he was kind of the unofficial leader of the Pied Piper from the few group that came out of Rainbow. But where'd that go? It's really hard to do it, especially all moneyless. Like I talk about this story, they had to wait 2 weeks when they were in Bozeman, I think, for a bike pump because they weren't going to buy it, right? Not using money, so they had to wait till someone gave it to them. That's often the case with the deep mendicancy, not using money. You're just sort of very passive, which can be a beautiful thing because stuff just pops into your life. Especially like you're like, universe, I could use this, and then it shows up eventually. That's the thing about the money is funny because it's like you have this power of like now with it, where you'd be like, I want this thing. Like, go out immediately and get it. Like I just found this Born to Run book, which I'd read a while ago, and the free box stuff's always interesting for me because it's like I take it as a sign a little bit, because it's like, oh, that could be anywhere, and it's just right here before me in this physical moment, and it's like I should probably take that book. And especially since I'm beginning back into barefooting, it was like, oh yeah, perfect synergy. But yeah, wrap this up. 32 minutes of rambling. That who 50 people may see this. Maybe I'll upload it to YouTube. I'll definitely upload it to Facebook if I can. But a lot of this is good for my own testimony.